Welcome. My name is Mark Depew. I'm the Director of Oral History with the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. Today I've got quite a chore ahead of me. I have the opportunity to talk to Andy Anderson. Good afternoon, Andy.
Good afternoon.
It is Monday, September 30th, 2019. We're going to be talking to Andy. As you can see on his hat, Andy, you're a World War II veteran, a veteran of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. And I know you've missed the first little skirmishes that the 1st Division had, but you were with them from Sicily all the way through the rest of the war. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So what we like to do always is start with the beginning of your life, though. And you and I today are primarily going to be talking about what it was like to be growing up in the Depression era in central Illinois. So tell me when you were born.
I was born on December 2nd, 1922.
So you're closing in on being 97 years old?
I'll be 97 December.
Wow. And where were you born?
In a farmhouse in Cass County, Illinois.
Okay. And pretty close to the Illinois River then?
On the Sangamon River.
Sangamon River, okay. Tell me about your parents. Let's start with your father. What was his name?
My dad's name was Roscoe Anderson. And my mother's name was Virgie McHenry.
And what did your dad do for a living?
He was a farmer at that time.
Okay, you were born in 1922, so heady years in the First World War era for farmers, but then not so good by the time of 1922, or was it still pretty good by then?
It was still pretty good until 2930.
Okay, when the Great Crash occurred.
Yes.
What happened to him after that?
Well, in 1930, my dad lost everything. Not really everything, but almost everything. We lost the land that we had farmed, and we had a number of head of livestock, and over 2/3 of that was gone. We had a car, that was gone. A lot of the farming equipment was gone. So it became a struggle after that.
How many acres did he own?
He didn't own any. We rented land. And in those days, in the South, I guess they call it sharecropping, but you rented land on a percentage basis.
So he was a tenant farmer?
Tenant farmer.
Even in the 1920s he was doing that?
Yes.
Okay. How many acres was he renting?
At our top, we were farming 160 acres.
Okay. What, a quarter section then?
That's a quarter section.
Okay. And what did he do after that?
After that, he became just a farm hand like a lot of other people, or taking day jobs wherever he could find them. And we, at that point in time, there were 6 children, and there was more to come.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about, I understand your dad was a World War I veteran, is that right?
He was in the service prior to World War I and served in the Philippines.
Okay.
And he came home and got out, and when he got out, they took his brother, and his brother fought in World War I.
Did your dad ever talk about the experiences in
My
the
dad
Philippines?
never, once in a while he would mention the Philippines, but none of us ever got any history out of him on his experience. I just assumed that it was something he didn't like and wanted to forget it.
How would you describe your dad?
My dad was a hard worker, a good thinker, and he believed that you should always tell the truth, and if you make a mistake, correct it.
How tough was it for him then to have the Great Depression? He's not even a tenant farmer anymore, which certainly wasn't a fat life at that time, but now he's not even able to do that.
It was tough. When I'm old enough to remember to start to put things together, by this time there was 9 of us kids. And it had to be really tough for him. Of course, my oldest sister was 5 years older than me, and the next sister was 4 years older than me. So they sort of helped Dad keep the family together and to make sure that we survived as a family unit.
Where were you living at the time?
We were living in a little village. We were living in the country when the crash hit, but 2 or 3 years later, we moved into a little village of Oakford in Menard County,
Oakford.
and I grew up there.
Did you have an acre or so of land in
No,
Oakford?
we lived in the village. We just we rented a house, and we had enough space for a garden spot, and that was it.
I would think that garden would have been very important to the family.
It was. We raised potatoes and beans and carrots and all those things that you needed to survive.
Well, it sounds like you'd had something like at least a half an acre of land to do that.
No, it was probably less than a third of an acre.
The whole thing must have been in garden then.
Practically all of it.
Okay, there were 9 kids overall. Where were you in the birth order?
I was the oldest son, and I was third from the top.
Okay, well, we talked about your dad. How about your mother?
My mother passed away in 1934. She died of pneumonia.
What was her name?
Virgie
What was her maiden name?
McHenry.
Okay. And did they meet after he got back from the Philippines?
My feeling was that they knew each other before he went into service.
Died when you were 11 years old then.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, did she work?
She never worked. She worked raising a family,
Yeah,
doing
9
laundry,
kids.
baking bread, and cooking.
Mm.
That's the thing I remember about my mother, how much he had to work just to do things for the family. And this was back in the washboard days when you used the old scrubber with the washboard. I never forget her hanging clothes on the line and hoping the sun came out and it didn't rain, so she get them in the house dried.
Did you, the family wear a lot of hand-me-downs then
Yes,
growing?
we did. Yeah. Something new was, if you got it, it was usually at Christmas time.
Okay. How would you describe her personality?
Well, the way I can, she was an easy person to get along with, and she believed that we should go to church. She didn't believe in swearing, and she didn't believe in drinking, but she never convinced my dad that was a bad idea.
So your dad had a drink now and then?
He had a drink now and then.
And did he swear now and then?
Yes. It's a common thing when you in the country. The way I recall, most everybody swore.
You mentioned your mom was easy to get along with. Your dad?
Well, he knew how to get a switch off a tree and enforce his rules.
In other words, your dad was the disciplinarian
He
of
was
the
a
two?
disciplinarian.
Remember any time you got in trouble that you got a little discipline?
Oh yes, many times. And as I got a little older, I could run, and I used to run. And he said, "You have to come to the table to eat." So he just waited for him.
Okay. Andy, do you remember any times when you got in trouble that you deserved it?
Oh, always. I was an ornery kid, and I admitted it. Yeah.
Anything in particular?
I didn't have to admit it. My sister had always told him.
Well, thank you very much, huh? Now, your given name is not Andy, is it?
No, it's Gerald.
How come you didn't go by Jerry or Gerald?
Well, they hooked me with that Andy name when I started school, and it stuck.
Who's they?
Other students and friends and neighbors
Didn't mind that?
didn't mind. I didn't care as long as I got something to eat 3 times a day.
Well, I imagine you had plenty of chores around the house, though.
We did. But even when we moved into the village, I started working as a farmhand when I was 12 years old.
So shortly after your mother died.
Yes,
Were you getting paid?
I was getting paid. Kids got $1 a day, and the adults got $1.50.
So your dad was making $1.50 a
Dad
day.
was making $1.50, and I was making $1, and we'd go shock wheat. And so I asked the farmer, I said, "How come my dad gets 50 cents a day more than I do?" And he said, "Because you're a damn kid," just like that. So I didn't say anymore.
Your dad's making $1.50 a day. Was he working 6 days a week?
No, when just during harvest season or plowing corn time, and when farmers needed extra help.
How in the world was the family making ends meet?
Well, tough. It was tough.
Did he go hunting?
Yeah, we hunted squirrels, in season or out of season, and ducks in season or out of season. May be cruel to say that, but that's the way it was. But we hunted to put things on the table.
You don't even have enough land with a third of an acre to have hogs. Did you have any chickens?
We had chickens, a few chickens.
And I'm guessing there was no electricity in this house.
Originally there wasn't. We had kerosene lamps. And then a few years later they put in electricity.
How about indoor plumbing?
No indoor plumbing. The old outhouse.
So what did you do for a bath? How often did you take a bath?
We had a big galvanized tub that we used for a bath. Everybody in the house used it.
Well, I want to go back to 1934. Did your mother die suddenly?
Well, it turned out to be suddenly. She had been sick for 3 or 4 days, and I remember the doctor only lived a few houses from us, and they had him over, and I can remember him looking at my dad and shaking his head, and the next morning she was gone.
What was your reaction to finding out your mother had passed away?
Well, it was just strange, you know. All of a sudden, I had this woman in the house that took care of us, and then she wasn't there. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, my 2 older sisters began to usurp all those duties and to make sure that we stayed together as a family. And
how else did life change when your mother had passed away?
well, it was just different. But my 2 older sisters were in high school, and my dad arranged with the school board for them to go to school every other day, and for the rest of that year. And then my oldest sister graduated, and she took care of the family while the other girl graduated the next year. And by that time, I was getting ready for high school, so a lot of the responsibilities of earning some of the livelihood was dependent upon me.
You were earning $1 a day when you had the opportunity to work. Where did that money go?
In the family pot generally, or to buy clothes.
And there was other boys as well that the same thing was going on?
My younger brother next to me was 8 years, and then the other brother was 10 years, and then the youngest was 11 years younger than me. So they didn't really grow up, and they were still very young children during the worst times of the Depression.
In other words, they might not even really remember your mother much at all.
My 3 brothers have no recollection of our mother.
Is there a special memory you have about your mother?
Yeah, I can remember that. We used to go to church in the wagon, and my mother always wore a hat to church. It didn't make any difference where we went. If we didn't go for 6 months, when we went to church, she wore a hat. And to this day, when I go to church, I look the crowd over to see women that have hats on.
No, they don't wear hats anymore.
Not many.
What church did you go to?
We went to the Baptist church first, and then we went to the Methodist church. Whichever one we went to the Baptist church when we lived in the country. Moved to Oakford, the church was Methodist, and we went there. I still go there.
Was that your mother's doing, getting all the crew to church?
Yes.
Did that change after she passed away?
Some. My sisters used to talk about it, and of course, you know, I was growing up with the idea that I was supposed to be a man. I wasn't supposed to be fooling around doing what I called sissy things. So it took a while for them to get me in the notion to go to church.
Was going to church a sissy thing in your mind?
Well, you know how kids are when they, if, especially in the sports world, if you're a sports kid and kids aren't participating in sports, you have all kind of names for them. They're not part of your crowd, you know. So I went through all that.
Mm. Okay. You mentioned that that you had sports. What I'm curious about, you went to high school.
Mm-hmm.
There was an awful lot of kids at that time that you knew, I'm sure, who were stopping school after 8th grade.
Yes. And my dad told me when I started high school, see, I'd already started I'd made the baseball team and softball team and basketball team in 7th and 8th grade. So he knew I was going to go to, if I went to high school. And he said, if you don't pass, I'm pulling you out of school and getting you a job. So I made sure I did enough work to pass so I could play sports.
Do all your brothers and sisters manage to go to high school as
Yes.
well?
All of my, all the 9 of us kids went to Petersburg High School except my brother Art. And he quit when he was 14, because that was during the war years, and started working construction. And by the time I got home when he was 15, he was driving a bulldozer on a construction crew. So going to school was out for him. His theme was that I make more than the teachers. So.
Okay. What I want to ask, though, step back, not high school, but talk about grade school and middle school. Where were you going for those?
Oakford.
Was it a one-room school in some cases?
The Oakford school was a 2-room school. First 4 grades in 1 room, and the next 4 in the 1 through 4 in 1 room, and 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th in the other.
Okay. That sounds pretty close to the one-room school experience.
It's the same theory.
What was it like then, going to a school where you had 1st through 4th grade all in the same class?
It was different, but there again, I knew if I wanted to play sports, I had to study enough to at least make an effort to pass. So.
Well, even in grade school, did you know that's what you wanted to do?
Oh yeah.
What kind of things were you doing at home when you had a chance in a spare moment?
Well, Dad always made sure that if there was garden work to do, I did my share of that. And I picked up odd jobs around the country store. And I used to, when they shelled the corn at the elevators in the village, I used to borrow a wheelbarrow and pick up the residue that didn't make it and sell it to the people who raised chickens. And I had all kind of devious ways to pick up a nickel or a dime, and I wasn't lazy.
When you had a spare moment, did you have a ball or a glove or a bat? Or
we had a hoop on the garage, and I had a beat-up old basketball, and I shot that thing all over the place.
Did you have a metal chain netting on the hoop?
No.
Was there any kind of netting on the hoop?
No, nothing, just a rim. You would. But the independent, in all those villages, the guys that didn't go on to high school, or the guys that went to high school and didn't go on to college, we called those the independent teams. And Oakford always had a very good independent team.
What, baseball team?
Baseball team. So I started playing with those guys when I was 13 years old.
Okay, Oakford. I'm trying to figure out the dividing line between a Cubs fan or a Cardinals fan.
It's pretty thin.
Which one did you root for?
Well, all of my family, most all of my family, currently are Cardinal fans. I'm not. I still remember, I think it was about the time I graduated from high school, the Cardinals had kind of a mess. They got in trouble with Landis when he was commissioner. And he ran Braden out of the Cardinal business and told Branch Rickey to find another team. So Rickey went to the Dodgers and Braden went into football. As far as I know, he never got back into baseball. But I remembered that if they were crooks, they shouldn't be in baseball. That was my philosophy. And so I said I didn't think that was proper, so I never rooted for them.
You rooted for the Cubs instead?
Anybody but the Cardinals.
Okay. Did the family have a radio?
We had a radio in later years. My first experience with a radio was the year that Hoover was elected president. We didn't have a radio, but the neighbors down the road had one. So my dad and mother hitched up the team, and us kids that were old enough went with them to the neighbors, and we listened to the ceremony on that radio, and I couldn't figure out how they was getting the noise out of that little black box. But I remember that distinctly.
So when you got to the 30s after your mother had passed away, the family did have a radio?
We did have a radio, yeah. You could get a radio then for $4 or $5.
Mm.
Of course, it took you a week to make that money, but
That was quite an investment back then.
Yeah.
Okay. Getting back to school, how far was the school when you were just a young tyke going to grade school? How far was it away from where you guys were living?
Well, early on, we lived about a mile. And then one year, we lived 2.5, 3 miles from school, and we walked. There was no buses in those days.
The classic stories you hear from the grandparents, I walked,
Yeah,
snow, sleet, rain,
that's true.
and that was just expected.
Well, if you went to school, it was.
Do you remember any of your teachers in grade school?
Yeah, I remember one, she failed me in the 3rd grade.
For the whole year?
Yes. There was 3 kids in the 3rd grade, and they fired the teacher before the year ended. And the other 2 students in my class, their parents, their father was on the school board. So, in order to get back, she flunked all 3 of them. So then that next year, before I finished the 2nd year in the 3rd grade, we moved to another jurisdiction. And I finished that year in the 3rd grade and went back for the fall, and the teacher told my dad, said, this boy doesn't belong in the 4th grade, I'm going to put him in the 5th grade. So I skipped the 4th grade and went into 5th and just went on.
Did you do 3rd grade twice?
Twice.
Did that sour you on the whole notion of going to school?
No, I didn't understand it, but I realized school was important there, and I had been led to believe it was important. Yeah.
Family's awfully poor. I wonder if you had anything at home to read as well.
Well, I started reading the newspaper when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I liked not only the local stuff, but I began to read a little bit about politics and the legislative process and all that. So when I went to high school, the only subject I ever got A's in was history.
So you liked the politics at the time.
Well, it was competitive. And
Do you know what your dad was?
he was a Rock River Republican, and my mother was a Democrat.
Oh, they had a mixed marriage then.
Yeah. But see, when they were first married, my mother couldn't vote.
Oh, that's right. 1920 was the amendment to give women the vote.
And I can remember them sitting at the table talking about this one and that one, but I never heard them ever say who they're going to vote for. They just talked about the people that were involved in the race.
I would imagine after your mother passed away, the family probably didn't have a lot of opportunities to talk about things like politics around the dinner table.
That's right.
Was there a dinner table?
Yeah, we had a big dinner table, and we always had the evening meal together. We might not be around for lunchtime, or this kid was going here and the other kid was going somewhere else for breakfast time, but we always had the evening meal. That's why I like, under the current program, the Blue Bloods on TV. There's a segment in every one of those programs where they sit at that table as a family. And that reminds me of my younger years when we grew up.
Were the girls then doing the cooking?
Yes.
What was on the dinner table typically?
Normal. Beans and meat, potatoes, things that my dad raised potatoes every year. And his theory was you plant them on Good Friday, wet or dry. Whether it's raining or sunshine, you plant potatoes on Good Friday. And we always had potatoes.
I would imagine, though, there's not a lot of meat on the table.
That depended on what time of the year. Every once in a while, my dad had worked for a farmer who'd give him a pork shoulder or a big chunk of beef and that sort of stuff. And that helped.
Yeah, that would be important, I would think. How about holidays, especially holidays you might remember in the mid to late 30s when your mother's no longer around? Any special memories about Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving and Christmas, we always had something. Might not have been bountiful, but we always had something. In 1941, I had gone to Chicago to work, and I came home over Thanksgiving, and I got in the night before, and I asked my oldest sister, I said, what are you going to have for Thanksgiving tomorrow? And she said, I don't know, I got everything arranged, but we don't have any meat. So my dad had always had a shotgun, and I couldn't find a shotgun. So a neighbor across the street from me, his boys, he had some boys about my age, and they all hunted. So I went over and asked them if I could borrow one of their guns. So they let me use a 410 shotgun and gave me 3 shells. And I took my young brother Art, and at that time all around Oakford was brushy land and so forth, where there was a lot of pheasant and quail. So we went out and I shot 2 pheasants. I'll never forget that Thanksgiving. And we had pheasant that evening for Thanksgiving, and my brother always said, yeah, he used me as a bird dog.
Get some buckshot you encounter when you're eating that?
No,
or
never.
It all out? Well, that was memorable. You had to. Did somebody else clean the pheasants, or did
My sister did. She knew all about that stuff. Chickens or ducks or whatever, she could do that.
Okay. Well, you talked about high school already. When did you graduate from high school?
1940,
And that was Petersburg High School?
Petersburg High School.
How far away was that?
9 miles.
How
We
did-
had, when I went to high school, they had started bus routes. So we were bused to the school. And they also started during that time, if you were involved in sports, they had other transportation for the kids involved in the sports.
You mentioned sports several times already, so obvious that sports was pretty important to you.
Yes, it was.
Was it just the thrill of the game and competing, or did you have a means to the end? You had a goal in mind?
Well, it was a means to an end, something to do. And I was always competitive. And if you're not competitive in sports, you just lose spinning your wheels.
What sports did you participate in?
Whatever they had. They had softball and baseball, basketball and track, and I participated in all of them.
Was Petersburg too small to have a football
Well,
team?
they had football, but in the Depression they had given it up. But when my younger brothers were in high school, they reinstituted the program, and they played football too.
Okay. Would you have played football?
If they'd had it, I'd have played, or tried to.
Okay. Baseball, what position?
I was a catcher, but I could play all the positions.
Basketball, what position?
I was a guard,
How tall were you at the time?
5'9".
Okay. So were there some kids quite a bit bigger than you?
We had a kid when I was a sophomore that came in, 6'5", was the biggest kid in school, clumsy as an ox, but they made a basketball player out of him, and we had, during the 3 years, sophomore through senior, we had a pretty good basketball team.
Were you starting?
Oh yeah,
Point guard?
what they didn't call him point guard.
Yeah, I was going to say that was kind of a new invention afterwards.
Guards were supposed to handle the ball and make it possible for other people to get baskets, and you were supposed to guard the hot shots on the other team. That's in those days.
How about in track? What did you do in track?
I ran the 100 and the 220 and threw the weights, shot discus and javelin.
5'9" kid is throwing the shot.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was I did it on a lark to start with, and then I thought, well, I could do pretty well at it, and I outthrew everybody in my school, so it was natural I did it track meets. But our best event, we had one guy that was really quick on the dashes, and we had 3 other guys that were not super quick, just quick. So we had a relay team that we set the conference record and held it for about 10 years in the 220 relay.
And you were on that relay
I
team.
was on the relay team.
What position did you run there?
I ran the anchor. The quickest guy always ran the first leg to get a jump on everybody else. And then they figured if I need to make something up, hopefully I'd have something left to gain it.
So you closed the deal on
We
it.
closed the deal.
What was your favorite sport?
Basketball. I hate to give up basketball because basketball changed and I tried to change with it. Became a shooter. I never lost my defensive ability, but I became a much better shooter as I got older.
So basketball was changing in the middle 1930s?
Oh yeah, it changed changed radically. Used to have the jump ball after every basket and every free throw, and they instituted the out of bounds from the first on the free throw and then on the basket. Didn't have the 10-second rule. That changed from 4 fouls to 5 fouls, and the 3-second lane. All that came about in the late 30s. So the basketball underwent terrific changes in those years.
Sounds like they were trying to speed up the game some.
Yes, because there were a lot of games where the score was 9-8, 4-5, because they get the ball and hold it. They wouldn't try to score because they had the whole court. There was no penalty for holding the ball. So all the coaches used to say that's the Mark Peterman rule. He was the guy at Springfield High that won the state tournament by holding the ball.
Yeah, not too exciting for the fans, is it?
No, you'd get booed out of the gym nowadays.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay. What was your favorite subject in school? I think you already mentioned it was history.
History. I took whatever I had to take, the mandatory subjects. In Petersburg, you used to have to take at least 3 years of math, 3 years of English. No, you had to take 4 years of English, and you had to have 3 years of history. Well, I got my 3 years of history, and then they came up with about a half a year of world history, and the rest of it was economics and current events. So, and then they started agriculture, so I took 2 years of ag.
Speaking of agriculture, what did you think you wanted to do after you graduated?
It wasn't farm.
Not farming.
No, because I grew up with the horse farming, and I was tired of the damned old horses stepping on my feet and kicking at you and all that. So I did that kind of work, but I wouldn't, if I could ever able, I wasn't going to do it because I knew we could never own land unless I had some kind of way of earning funds to get the land.
Yeah, those were tough times. By 1939, 1940, the economy was moving up just a little bit. But what I'm wondering about during that time frame, were you paying attention? You said you read the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
Paying attention to what's going on in the world at that time.
Yes. In fact, we had the administration of our school kept everybody advised because they used to bring people in and talk about world events. I'll never forget they brought a guy in from Britain, and he talked about the Germans would never go beyond their borders because they didn't have the oil. Well, he didn't know what the hell he was talking about because the Germans didn't have the oil. They just took the country that had the oil.
Do you remember what year that was?
That was in the spring of 1940.
Wow.
So I'll never forget that because here 2 or 3 years later, I'm getting ready to go over there and fight the devil to start all that.
Well, and if that's spring of 1940, of course 1930...
Germany had already started their parade across, taking Poland and all that.
Yeah, Poland was September of 1939. Mm-hmm. This gentleman from England was there talking to your class maybe about a month or two before Germany invaded France.
Probably.
Now, you're a young man, 17 at the time maybe? Something like that? Were you thinking this could have an impact on my life?
I knew because they were already talking about the draft. The Conscription Act, they called it. And they passed that in 1940. And everybody, when they became 18, had to register. So my dad always said, when they need you, they'll come for you. And that was his theory.
Were you interested at all in joining the military?
Two buddies of mine went in the Marine Corps in July of 1940, and they were already 18. I wasn't 18. And my dad wouldn't sign my papers. And that's when he said, when they need you, they'll come for you. And so I waited.
So you were content to wait? You didn't get kind of anxious to join your buddies?
Well, once they were gone, I was busy with a job and so forth, and trying to make a few bucks.
Did you have any older brothers?
No, not I had an older brother that died in babyhood.
Okay.
But not in adult life. No.
Okay. So when you said there were 9 children, was that part of the 9?
No, he would have been the 10th.
Okay.
Yeah. But
So,
I don't even remember him.
so you were the oldest boy.
I was the oldest boy.
Okay. And you already mentioned selective service, and you're content to sit it out. Good enough ball player to go to college?
Oh, I had offers. I had scholarship offer at Illinois College of Jacksonville, Eureka College, and College in Decatur for baseball.
Now, Eureka and I don't know about Jacksonville. I would think that they did not offer scholarships.
Well, they offered some kind of help.
Okay.
I don't think scholarship was part of it, but there was some kind of assistance you could get. Maybe like a job working in the restaurant for your food and all that sort of. But I wanted to go out and try to earn a nickel. I was tired of running around being broke. So I wanted to earn money.
So we turn 18, you graduate from high school. Your dad was going to let you keep that money now? I didn't have to go back in the family coffers?
Partly. I lived at home. I shared that with my sisters and family.
Were the 2 girls still living at home as well?
There was 3 girls living at home at that time. See, my one next to me is 2 years behind me, and the next one was 3 years behind me, and the next sister was 5 years behind me. When I got out of school, all 3 of them were still in school.
It sounds though that the 2 older sisters had moved out of the house.
One of the older sisters got married, the other one hadn't, and she still lived at home and took care of the rest of them.
Where did you get work then after high school?
Oh, I worked in the grocery store, worked on the farm part-time, worked on construction. That's how I got involved in the union business. I had a laborer's card when they built Highway 97, extended from the junction out here to Galesburg. They had a deal with the contractor that the labor force would come from the counties that they were passing through. So I was in high school, and they needed guys to push a wheelbarrow and use a shovel. And I was a big kid, I could do that. So I had a permit card when I was 15 years old.
A permit card, a working permit card?
Working permit was the Laborers International Union.
So you were a union card member?
Yeah. Was
your dad ever in the union?
Part-time.
But you said he was a rock rib Republican.
Well, he had some of those theories that I never did agree with. We never argued much about politics, but I never agreed with.
Well, what was his theory?
Well, his theory was that the government shouldn't help people. You're supposed to be independent. I said, that's great if you can do it. If you can't do it, what's the alternative? You know, so.
Sounds like you were a proud union member.
Well, in my lifetime, I've been a member of 4 international unions. So, if it was available where I worked, I was a member.
Okay. Well, you graduated in the spring of 1940. A year and a half later, You're still not in the military.
I'm still not in the
You're
military.
still waiting.
In 41, I went to Chicago and got a job working for Land O'Lakes Creamery, Land O'Lakes Butter. And I worked there until after the Jap bombed Pearl Harbor.
Well, that was my next question. But when you went up to Chicago, you're obviously not living at home anymore.
No.
Where did you find a place to
Well,
live?
one of the guys that we knew had grown up in my community was working for this company. And he said, if you'll come up, I'll give you a hand, in your interview. And you go in, if you get a job, I'll rent you a room. And that's the way it worked out. I lived with them, paid them room rent, and did that for about 8 or 9 months.
Was the job in Chicago?
In Chicago. The building is still there, Fulton Market Cold Storage Building. I don't know if Land O'Lakes is still there now.
Yeah. Andy, do you remember how much you were making a week or a day?
I was making about 40 cents an hour. So that's a little over $3 a day.
That doesn't sound much to me, but it's a whole lot better than you were making on the farming.
On the farm, $1 a day.
Did you feel like you finally had some money?
Oh, I had money, and it felt good to have change in my pocket and to be able to send money home.
Did you have enough money to maybe take a girl out to dinner or anything like that?
We'd go to eat hamburgers.
Take them to the movies?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could go to the movies for 10 cents in those days.
Did you have a car?
No.
Did your dad have a car by that time?
We had a car that he lost in the Depression. My dad never owned a car after that.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Hard to imagine. That was tough times then.
Tough times. Yep.
Tell me about your memories of December 7th.
Well, we were in Chicago, and the Bears was playing the Chicago Cardinals at Comiskey Park. And this couple that I was sharing a house with, we were downtown walking the streets, because in those days you could walk all over Chicago and be safe. That's not exactly the case anymore, but we were on State Street, and they had a speaker on the street announcing the football game, by quarter and that sort of thing, because Bears was a big item in Chicago, even though the Cardinals were there. People talked about the Bears, but anyway, they said they made the announcement that the Japanese had suddenly bombed Pearl Harbor, and that's the way I recall that.
What was your reaction in hearing that news?
Well, I thought it would have been anybody, had been the Germans, from the way they did in Europe, because they'd already overrun Europe and was bombing London and all that. So I thought, we were going to have trouble. I had never thought that the Japanese was in that category, but that's the way it worked.
I don't want to insult you or anything. Did you know where Pearl Harbor was at that time?
Yes. I knew about the naval base and that sort of thing.
Did you decide then it's time to get in the military?
No, I said, that spring in 42, I still wanted to play ball. I felt like I could still play ball. But in Chicago, they didn't have baseball in the recreation leagues. They had that big 16-inch softball. Oh, I didn't want to play with that. So I made an inquiry in here in Springfield about labor jobs, and my people told me that there's a lot of jobs in Springfield. So I quit Land O'Lakes and came here and got a job at Alice Chalmers. Alice Chalmers had one of those Lend-Lease contracts building crawler-type tractors for the Russians.
What kind of tractors?
Crawler, Caterpillar type.
Oh, yeah, okay.
They did the small bulldozer-type tractors. And so I went to work there, and that was in May.
Now, if I picked up enough here, you went to work at Alice Chalmers because you could play sports when you got down to Springfield?
Yeah.
Did they have their own company team?
Well, Alice Chalmers had a softball team in the community leagues. The community leagues were big in baseball and softball in those days. Well, I couldn't get on that softball team, but one of my buddies played with Hummers. Hummer had a factory.
Hummers?
It was right across from the old Georgian restaurant on 9th and South Grand. That land over there, they made parts for lawnmowers and all that. Anyway, I made their softball team, and I played with. There used to be a guy here that was kind of a part-time scout for the old Washington Ball Club, and he always got a group of guys together. And he called them the Jack Rosser All Stars. So I played baseball with them, and played softball with Hummers during the week.
Did you have the notion at the time that you were good enough that someday you could make the pros?
Well, there again, those kind of notions always was blindsided by the fact that the military was always there. Everybody knew that all guys in that age bracket, sometime or another, was going to be a part of the military.
Especially after 41, after
Yeah.
December 7th. But you're okay with waiting until they called you?
Yeah, so when, in the meantime, a bunch of guys that I had worked with in former construction jobs had gone to work for a big construction outfit in Kansas. They were building a defense plant in DeSoto, Kansas. So I ran into one of those guys when he came home for a weekend. And he said, "Andy, come out and go to work. Here, we're working 7 days a week, and 12 hours a day, and Monday through Friday, 10 hours on Saturday and Sunday." So I knew my number couldn't be 4. So one of my dad's friends was on the draft board. So I called him, and he said, "I can't tell you when you're going to be drafted." But he said, "When's your 20th birthday?" I said, "It's coming up in December." He said, "Don't make any plans after your 20th birthday."
20th?
Yeah. So I went and on Labor Day weekend, I quit my job at Alice Chalmers, hitchhiked to Kansas, and got a job with that construction outfit. And I worked for them until I got my call. Sure enough, on my birthday, I not only got my draft notice, I got my notice to report for active duty in the same day. So when I came home for Christmas, I never went back.
What draft board?
Out of Menard County.
So even though you were out in Kansas, they knew where to find you?
Oh, yeah. They had to know where to find it. Because my sister was picking up my mail.
Thanks, sis.
So then I arrived on January 25th, 43, I reported for duty.
Now, one reason that people would enlist before they were drafted is you had a little bit of control what service you ended up in.
Sometimes.
It sounded like you didn't really much care which service you would end up in.
Well, I'd heard enough about the military that your thoughts and theirs didn't always coincide, and it didn't take long. I was in the military 2 weeks before I had a name other than a dumb bastard. They called everybody.
Did you know it was the Army, though, from day one?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were okay with that, it sounds like.
Well, I was going to go somewhere.
Was there ever a recruiter that sat down and talked to you about, what do you want to do, son?
No.
There was never a discussion which branch you would end up serving in or
No,
anything
because
like that?
they were wanting bodies.
One last question before we get to your basic training. Did you have a girlfriend at the time?
Yes. But it wasn't serious.
Okay. Where was she?
She was here in Springfield.
And the girls knew that all the boys were heading overseas eventually, huh?
That's right.
Okay. So there was no discussion about keeping in letters going, anything like that?
Well, we were going to correspond, and out of sight, out of mind. And when I was gone, she was gone. So that's the way that worked.
Okay. Where did you take your physical?
In Peoria.
You remember anything about taking the physical?
No, just the ordinary physical. And I said afterwards it seemed to me like if your body was warm, they passed you.
I would imagine, though, with the kind of background you had, farming, working in factories, hard work, playing sports, that you were primed for the kind of people that they were looking for.
Well, They didn't reject me.
Okay. Where then for basic training?
I went to Scott Field. I was inducted to Scott Field. I was there for 3 days and then wound up in Camp Hood, Texas.
It's a long way south. So let me get this right. In January, you're in Scott Field.
That's Belleville, Illinois.
Cold.
Cold, 5 below zero, and snow on the ground. Get to Texas and it's 80 degrees.
So you're okay at doing basic in that heat?
Well, I was young and in good shape, so training never bothered me. I could walk 25 miles and I was ready to go again.
Do you remember any of those drill sergeants?
Oh yeah, yeah. So, they had to, they had to give orders and all that sort of stuff. After the first week or so, everything calmed down, and you're getting kids off the street from cities and off the farms, and they don't know a damn thing about close order drill, the manual arms, any of that sort of stuff. But it takes a little while to get into that system, and after about 2 weeks, the drill sergeants begin to loosen up because they got these same guys every day, and what they're learning and not learning is their fault. If they produce a product that somewhere down the line is not good enough, they're going to catch hell.
At that time, were you following what was going on in the war much?
Yeah, we heard the radio, and we had papers were available.
I would imagine just knowing that you're heading overseas someplace would be enough of an attention getter that you're paying attention to what they're trying to teach you.
Oh yeah. Well, especially when we got the weapons. If I'm going to have to use those weapons, I want to make darn sure that I knew what could make that thing work, and if it didn't work, how do you fix it so it does work?
What weapons did you?
We trained with bolt action World War I rifles. They had come out with the M1 Garand and the M1 carbine, but we didn't have them.
So you were using Springfields, I would guess.
Springfields and Enfields.
Did you have any experience in rifles growing up, or was it primarily shotguns?
Shotgun, but once in a while, borrow the neighbor's rifle, but generally we hunted with shotgun.
You remember any funny stories from basic training?
Oh yeah. When we went to Camp Hood was a new camp, and the joke was it's full of sagebrush and rattlesnakes. Well, along about the 11th week, we had to go out in the field and live in the field in tents, So everybody said, well, who was going to be the first guy to get a snake in their tent? And we had a guy that was just scared blue about snakes. And sure enough, the first night out, a snake appeared in his tent, and you thought the world was on fire. But I'll never forget that.
What happened to the snake?
Well, they killed the snake, but
somebody else killed the snake?
Yeah, somebody else killed the snake. Well, rattlesnakes are not something you fool around with.
No.
But I'll never forget another thing. When the group that I went in, they had a big kid here that had gone to Lamprey High School and played football. In fact, I think he was all-state. His name was Fred Yanoni. And when we left basic training, he was the one guy in the company they kept him in Camp Hood for the football team. And the rest of us advanced on to be cannon fodder.
Andy, you should have been trying to work an angle of playing baseball for the Army.
They didn't have a baseball team then.
How good do you think basic training was in terms of teaching you the things that you needed to know?
It fit the system. The main thing they wanted to teach you was discipline. That whatever happened, you need to be disciplined. You need to be on time. You need to know how to do certain things, and what they taught you, they expected you to perform.
And to do it as a team?
As a team.
What other weapons? Did you have any cruiser weapons training during basic?
We trained with the old 30 caliber machine gun used in World War One, and the 50 didn't change. The old 50 caliber machine gun, and we trained with
You actually
that.
fired the 50 cal.
Oh yeah, and the 75 millimeter howitzer. We trained with those too.
That all occurred in basic training?
Because originally they said we were going to be trained as tank destroyer troops. Well, when we got to Newport News, Virginia, that changed. Make it difference what you were, you were going to wind up in the infantry.
So was basic training 13 weeks at the
13
time?
weeks to the day.
And did you spend any more time at Camp Hood after that?
No, so at the end of that 13 weeks, the trains were in Killeen, and we headed east.
You said tank destroyer. Most people wouldn't know the difference between a tank and a tank destroyer. What was
tank
it?
destroyers, it's like the armored division, so they didn't have as many tanks. They had more half tracks, but their objective was to seek out and destroy tanks.
And what I read briefly was it generally had a bigger gun, but didn't have a turret in many cases,
Sometimes.
or an
Yeah.
open top.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you have been okay to be in a tank destroyer unit?
Would have had to been. If they put me there, that's where I'd have served.
Andy, it sounds like you're used to saying, "Yes, Sergeant. Yes, sir."
Well, easiest way to get along was to obey orders. The stockade was full of guys that didn't.
Did you get KP?
Oh yeah, first thing out of the box. We got to Camp Hood, and I went to bed that first night, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, some guy was waking me up and said, "Are you Anderson?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Go to the kitchen." So I had KP the first day, I had guard duty the second day, and I had barracks orderly the third day.
Are you learning by this time that having a name that starts with an A is not a good thing?
Alphabetical order, just go right down the line.
Must have been prefer to be Zelensky instead of Anderson, huh? Okay. Where to after Camp Hood?
Well, we wound up in a camp in Sharon, Pennsylvania called Camp Shenango. It turned out to be a holding camp where they, well, that's what it was. They held troops there till they decided where they could send them.
I checked on the map. It's not, well, it's straight north of Pittsburgh, it looks like.
Closer to Meadville.
Okay.
Yeah, and Erie. Erie's not too far away. And you go in the other direction, Buffalo, New York.
What did you do while you were there?
Nothing. Every morning we fell out and had, they called a roll. And after you had chow, they called a roll again, and we did close order drill for 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And the rest of the time, there was nothing to do. There was no training, and you weren't supposed to go off camp. So I was over in the order room one day doing something, and the guy running the desk said, "You doing anything?" And I said, "No, not right now." He said, "Take this down to headquarters." So I became a message runner. Well, in that process, I had access to the company commander's desk where the passes were. So we made arrangements to get out of camp at night. And that's how I met the girl that I finally married.
Well, that's the next part of the story. And we got a picture of her up here, up on the screen.
Yes. And
So-
I still have that picture.
Well, so
And
you
that's-
got this picture. How did you meet this girl?
I met this girl on a blind date 2 days before I shipped out to North Africa. I didn't know I was going to North Africa, but that's the way it worked out.
On a blind date?
Yeah, she was living in an apartment with 3 or 4 other ladies, and this one guy that was in this administrative desk that I talked about, he had a car. So he said, I'll take you guys, we'll pick 3 or 4 other guys, and we'll blind date these gals, and so that's the way it worked out. Well, the first night, we didn't know we were going to be shipped out. We get back to camp, and the next day the orders came through that 24 hours later we were going to be shipped out. So I saw her again the next night, and that was it.
What did you do that first night?
Well, we just talked, and I think we went somewhere and had Coke and popcorn and that sort of thing. Because these girls, they were all working at the defense plant, and the defense plant had something to do with the apartment where all these gals lived, and they had a lack of a better term, bed check. They had to be in before 11 o'clock, so we had to be back in camp too. So that's just the way it was. But we made arrangements the first night to meet the second night.
Just the two of you, or the whole group?
The whole group, yeah. So that second night, I said, it'd be kind of nice if we kept in touch. She said suit her fine, so we kept in touch.
What's her name?
Josephine Elaine. Her maiden name was Josephine Elaine Hillman.
What's the last name?
Hillman.
Hillman?
Yeah. Hillman.
Okay. What was it about Josephine?
Well, I don't know what it was, but it was something. That I'd never had that feeling with any other female, and it stayed with me, because we corresponded. We didn't see each other again for 28 months.
I suspect you didn't have this picture, though.
I got this picture. We were in England training for the landing on Omaha. We didn't know it was going to be Omaha. So I kept this picture all that time, and I used every method I could to keep it close to me wherever I was. I had pulled out the lining of a carbine cartridge case that I carried on my web belt. Sometimes I had it in there. Sometimes I had it in my boot. Sometimes I had it in my helmet liner. But I had this picture, and I still got it today.
Andy, when you left to go to Camp Hood, you left a girlfriend back in Springfield that you were going to correspond with. Were you corresponding with two girls for a while?
No. She'd already decided that Andy was passé. So that's the way that worked out.
Apparently, Josephine didn't feel that way.
Well, she had that some kind of feeling anyway. But in the meantime, while I was gone, she decided she wanted to be a nurse. So she had taken the exams they had what they called the Cadet Training Corps, and she passed and went into that program, and that's what she was doing when I came home in '45.
You know that corny old phrase, absence makes the heart grow fonder? Is that the way it worked for the two of you?
Well, it didn't lessen it any. But when we had corresponded and sent pictures back and forth, and when I saw her at that L station in Chicago that night in '45, I thought, most beautiful thing in the world. And it worked out. Later on, we got married, and it worked.
Well, we're going to hear more about it. I'm just intrigued by the story, though, that the two of you couldn't have hardly even known each other after just those first 2 days.
Just casual, Sure, we enjoyed each other's company.
Okay. Where to after those few days up in Pennsylvania?
Went to Newport News, Virginia. And I went to Camp Patrick Henry and was there 3 or 4 days, and all of a sudden a truck showed up and trucked us down to the pier. And we got on the biggest boat I'd ever seen in my life.
Yeah, anybody who knows anything about Newport News means you're ready to ship out then.
We knew we were going at least to Europe.
Did you have any preference, Europe versus Asia?
It wouldn't have made any difference, because when you're a GI, you do what they tell you.
You remember the name of the ship?
West Point.
USS West Point?
Yeah. It had been a passenger ship prior to the military taking it over and using it for a troop ship.
I believe it was the SS America at that time.
I don't remember what it was, but I can still remember it. They put 14,000 guys on that thing, and there was guys everywhere, sleeping on top, just everywhere.
What part of the ship did you sleep in? Do you
I was
recall?
in one of the lower decks, in the hammock. I never,
In a hammock,
those, yeah,
swaying back and
Yeah.
forth.
but it was a smooth ride. It only took 6 days to go to Casablanca.
Does that mean you didn't get seasick?
No, I didn't get seasick. A lot of guys did, but I thought to myself, if they get sick of this kind of a ride, what would it be like if it was really rough?
This is what time of the year now we're talking about?
June,
June of
June of
1942.
43.
43.
Yeah.
Okay. How much of a concern were U-boats?
Well, the West Point was fast enough. They had that zigzag thing. If they could zigzag enough that the U-boat couldn't get a line on them. So that's why they were allowed to travel by themselves.
You were not in a convoy then?
No, we were not in a convoy. You could go out to get up real high enough. You could see that trail you're leaving in the ocean behind you like a snake track back there.
Did you all know that at the time, that it was too fast really to be much of a
Well,
threat
they
with
announced
U-boats?
it over the speaker.
What else do you do for 6 days on this
Play
ship?
cards.
What kind of cards do you play?
Every kind. Some guys played pinochle, some guys mostly poker and shot craps. Of course, the card games and the crap games got smaller and smaller because certain individuals usually wind up with the money, you know.
Well,
I didn't have any money, so
you mean you didn't play any poker at all?
I didn't play any more going over, but I did coming home.
Were you a good poker player?
The average.
So you at least had some pay, or did you?
Well, the pay at that time was $50 a month. Well, when we had gone in, you could make allotments. Well, my two young brothers were quite young yet then, so I had told my sister Roberta, she was still had an interest in the family, and I said, I'm going to make an allotment out to you for $30 a month. If my brother Bob and Jean need anything, because Dad might have had work, he might not have had work. I said, you use that money for whatever you think. So I sent her $30 a month. Well, insurance was $650, so there's $36.50 out of 50. I only had $30.50, so I wasn't going to accumulate much.
And I assume by this time you're still a buck private?
Well, I was still a private. I made PFC in Sicily. As soon as I went into combat, they all the privates in our company became PFCs.
What did your dad do during the war?
He worked in contract work, construction, so forth. Jobs were pretty plentiful then.
I would imagine he's finally making some decent
He's
money.
making decent money. And my two young brothers, they were entrepreneurs. They had all the paper routes in Oakford. And they were tearing up the basketball nets in grade school. They were super athletes.
What, better than you?
Yeah. I used to say, well, I opened the door for you, and they put me in the back seat, and then the nephews came along a few years later and put us all in the rumble seat.
Did the nephews play in college ball then? Were they good enough for that?
One of my nephews, yeah. One of my nephews even played some pro baseball with
wow.
the Phillies. And he had before he did that, he had the home run record here at Lincoln Land for, I'd say, something like 30 years.
Oh.
And,
Well, you come from a family of athletes then.
well, yeah, we tried.
Well, let's get back. We still got you stuck in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Did you know where you were headed?
We were,
I mean, there weren't too many places.
the
at
day
time.
we landed, they came on the speaker and said, in a few hours we're going to be docking in Casablanca, North Africa. So I thought the shooting had stopped in North Africa. I thought, what in the world are we doing here?
I'm just curious, had you seen the movie Casablanca?
Not then. I
That
saw
came
it
out in
after.
42, I think.
I saw it afterwards.
Okay. What did you think of Casablanca?
We did. I didn't see much of it. You know, they there again they had the convoy of trucks. Took us out in the desert about 15, 20 miles, and we lived in Tent City for about 3 weeks.
You got used to waiting then.
Oh yeah, yeah. And all this time, you know, we're supposed to be going to war, and we don't even have a weapon. We didn't have a steel helmet. And I thought, boy, what kind of an army is it?
Did they have you? You can't do much training without any of that. Did they have you doing any kind of training?
Well, we every day we'd go out and we had a guy that believed in running and hiking. So every day we ran a hike for 4 miles in 40 minutes, and that was it for the day. But there was a freight train that went into Casablanca every day about 11 o'clock in the morning and came back about 6 o'clock in the evening. So a lot of guys would get on that freight train and go into Casablanca. Well, the MPs in Casablanca, if they caught you in the city after 6 o'clock in the evening, they just put you in the stockade, no questions asked. So the guys always made it back on that train, so they'd get back in camp.
The guys, were you ever in those trips?
I went one time. They had a USO club there. It wasn't much, but it was someplace where I figured I was going to be safe. I didn't know anything about the Arabs and how they felt about Americans. You know, as far as I knew, they were all against us. But anyway, I went to this USO club, and there was 2 Australians in there, and I got in a conversation with them, and they led me to believe that Australia was the dream country of the world. You know, so afterwards I thought maybe it's not as good as they say it is, but I'd kind of like to go there. So after I retired, that was the first trip my wife and I took to Australia and New Zealand.
Wow, because of that one conversation.
Because that conversation with those
Now,
2 Aussies.
You didn't have much money. Did you have American dollars that you were getting paid in?
I still had a few dollars left, but when you went, we didn't have they had some kind of GI issue money. Now when we were in Sicily, we got lira, GI issue lira. We got paid one time, and that's how we got paid. Then when we got to England, they paid us in pound notes, whatever the pay was in the country.
Okay. And what do you say, 3 weeks there in Casablanca?
Yeah, about. And then all of a sudden, here come the trucks again, and they trucked us from Morocco to Tunisia.
Now, I get the timeline right. By the time you got to Casablanca, the fighting in North Africa...
That ended in May, and we got there on the 12th of June, 43.
And the...
Sicily didn't happen until the 10th of July. So I'm drawing a blank about what the hell's going to happen to us. You know.
Do you have any idea when you're at Casablanca, or even when you're heading towards Tunisia, what unit you're going to be assigned to?
No, nothing. You're just a spare part.
Yeah. No helmet, no weapon. Did you have some records that you took with you?
Well, I did whatever you could put in your pack. Yeah. But in those kind of days, you don't have much. You don't take much.
And hoping that the Army knows what the heck they're going to do with you.
I was hoping somebody knew.
Okay, now up to this point, every time I've asked you this question, I didn't care. Did you have a preference of what unit you wanted to be assigned to, or what you were going to be doing once you were in?
No, because I didn't think it would make any difference.
Were you, as far as the Army is concerned, your standard infantryman?
Well, I didn't know there's any other kind. You know, you're a GI, and they give you a rifle, and you're supposed to do this, and supposed to do that, and hoping they get the right results. You know. But when we got to Tunisia, right there again, they unloaded us at the harbor. Well, there was a whole bunch of LSTs. We'd heard about LST boats, but I'd never seen one. So they're herding us on. Well, on the way down to get on these boats, the Stars and Stripes had been printed, and one of the guys got a copy of the Stars and Stripes, and on the headline on one page was "Allies invade Sicily." So we knew then we're going to Sicily to be replacements for whatever units were in Sicily. Sure enough, 3 days later we're on the mainland in Sicily.
How long did it take you to go across from Tunisia to Sicily?
2 days.
What was the ride on that LST like?
Up and down, like a rowboat.
Yeah, because here's a flat bottom boat.
Flat bottom boat. But the food was good. But a lot of guys couldn't hold it down, but the food was good on there.
Did you hold it down?
Oh, I was lucky. I never got seasick.
What were they feeding you?
Well, they started out with canned salmon, and then they dressed up a little bit, and they used to put pork and beef in big cans, and they could open that up and warm it up and do things to it. It tasted pretty good. It beat sea rations.
Yeah. Is that what you'd be eating most of the time in both Casablanca and Tunisia?
Yeah. Every once in a while they'd dream up some different kind of food, but it was generally canned stuff.
Okay. Then landed where in Sicily?
Licata. That's where they made the landing, and then we followed the route up to where the units were.
And at what point in this timeline, do you know where you're going to end up?
Well, not really, but the first night out, when we de-trucked, the guys with the truck said, "This is the end of the line for us. We can't go any further." We were with the artillery units with the big red one. I didn't know it at that time, but I saw they had the designs on their vehicles, 1st Infantry Division. So I figured, well, that's where we're going. Sure enough, next day they took us and put us in individual companies.
Okay, we got a map of Sicily here. Licata, is that where you said?
Yes.
That's it's the red arrow that's farthest on the left side of the map, right about the central part of the southern Sicily.
Mm-hmm.
And then heading kind of northwest from there?
Yes. We went. We called it the center of the island, but you know our direction was all guesswork. But we knew we weren't going up the coast roads.
Okay. Where I want to end up today then, Andy, is figuring out what unit you're actually going to be in, and then the next time we meet, we're going to be talking about your combat experiences.
Okay.
So what unit did you end up in?
Well, they had I'll never forget this, they had a little, a shelter has half a pup tent. And they had this thing up on a couple of stakes, and this little old captain was sitting at a desk, which was just a block of wood, I think. And he had some papers, and I go up there, and he said, "What the hell do you do?" I said, "Whatever they tell me." And he said, "Well, you go to G Company." Well, I started turning away after I said yes, sir, and then another guy said, "Hey," and he called me back, and he said, "You know anything about explosives?" And I said, "Only that they're dangerous." I'd heard of dynamite, and we'd use dynamite in the country to blow stumps and that sort of thing, but I didn't know anything about TNT, all that. So he said, "You'll do." He said, "You go to headquarters company." So I went to headquarters company, and they put me in this mine detector squad, and that's how I learned the explosive business.
I saw someplace that it was the engineer pioneer platoon?
Ammunition Pioneer Platoon.
Okay.
A&P they called it, and every battalion headquarters had a headquarters company, and they not only had that kind of personnel, they had intelligence personnel, they had anti-tank gun crews, they had a war section, had a radio section, and so we were, man-wise, we had quite a pretty good number in the company, and we could also do some damage if we had to fight.
Did you get a weapon by that time?
The next day they gave me an M1, first one I'd ever seen.
And when did you get a helmet in this process?
Then the same day.
And all the rest of your gear?
All the rest of the gear, and then they took the M1 away from me and gave me a carbine. I'd never seen one of those before.
What was the rationale of getting the carbine instead of the M1?
Well, the M1 was all the rifle companies carried the M1, and we had to carry mine detector equipment and all that sort of stuff, so a little less cumbersome with the carbine, lighter,
Okay. Lighter, but also less range, right?
less range. They're a good weapon, like in up to 100 yards. Anything beyond that is kind of scary.
Okay. So you're in the headquarters company of which regiment?
2nd Battalion, the 16th Infantry. See, the 1st Division had the 16th, 18th, and the 26th Infantry Regiments.
Did you know anything about the 1st Infantry Division at that time?
No, very little.
Did you know that they'd gotten bloodied and they had as much experience
I
as any
found out
infantry?
very quickly.
I bet.
Yeah, I also found out very quickly that a lot of those old timers in the big red one did not like draftees.
Any experiences about how you found that out?
Well, conversations. They'd say, "Well, those damn DDs," you know. And the draftees would say, "Well, the REs don't know their blank from a hole in the ground, so
DD?
damn draftees."
Damn draftees.
And the RAs was the regular army. You know, those are $21 a month.
Some of those guys had been with the division before the war started.
Oh yeah, some of my first sergeant and my platoon sergeant had both had more than 20 years, and they wouldn't serve anywhere else. When it come time to re-enlist, if they couldn't re-enlist in the big red one, they'd have got out. They had that much loyalty, and they truly admired the division commander we had at that time, Terry Allen.
And there's another officer I wanted to ask you about, because I believe the 1st Division was part of Patton's 7th Army.
Well, Patton controlled everything in Sicily.
Did he already have a reputation by that time?
Well, I don't know. All I ever heard was the scuttlebutt. You'd pick up a conversation, but
Well, Andy, what did you hear in the scuttlebutt?
he was a bastard. But we got to meet him after the campaign. We didn't know he'd slapped these kids, and when we went after the campaign ended. Some of the other units, the 36th and some of the other infantry units, went to Italy behind the Germans, and us in the 9th Division were scheduled to go to England to train. But in the meantime, we went back to the other end of the island, back around Licata, to wait out ships to go to England. So they had built a platform about a half mile down the road from us where the whole battalion could go and sit on the hillside and watch USO shows when they came floating through. And we had just seen Bob Hope, Francis Langford, and Helen O'Connell. Well, the next day they called us out and said, "We're going back to the hillside." We thought we were going to see another USO show, and it was Patton. He got up on the stage and talked for about 3 minutes about how we ought to kill all the SOBs and all that sort of thing, and then he went into this apology and got back in his command car and left. That was my first actual experience with Patton.
So you're looking at him from this audience on a little tiny figure on the stage.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, Andy, I think that's probably a fairly good place for it to end today. We'll talk a little bit more about Sicily and then a lot more about your time in England and especially D-Day and fighting your way across Northern Europe. So we'll pick that up next time.
I'll be available.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.